Every empire leaves a record. Some records were never meant to be found. This is file No. 004. There is a book in a climate-controlled vault at Yale that has defeated every codebreaker who has ever opened it. Not because the code is hard, because no one can prove there is a code at all. 240 pages. Roughly 35,000 words written in a flowing, confident hand that never hesitates and almost never corrects itself. A script of 2, maybe 3 dozen characters that appears nowhere else on Earth, before or since. For 600 years, it has been read by no one. Not the Jesuits who owned it, not the emperor who may have bought it, not the codebreakers who cracked Nazi ciphers and then broke themselves against this. At the end of file 003, I promised you a text written in a language no one has ever identified, inside a book that is either an elaborate fraud or the last secret of a mind that took it to the grave. This is that book, and the mystery here is not a lost language. It is worse than that. Let's start with what the record actually holds. The manuscript is small. You could hold it in one hand. It is written on vellum, treated animal skin, the writing surface of the medieval and early modern world. Around 240 pages survive, though the original was almost certainly larger. Folios are missing, and some pages fold out into panels 3 and 4 times the width of the book. The archive divides it into sections by what the pictures seem to show. There is a herbal section, page after page of plants rendered in careful botanical detail. An astronomical or astrological section, circular diagrams, stars, suns, what look like zodiac figures. A biological section, and this is the strange one, dozens of small nude female figures standing in pools and tubs, connected by a plumbing of tubes and channels. And a pharmaceutical section, jars, roots, fragments of plants, as if from an apothecary's manual. Here is the first thing that should unsettle you. The plants are drawn with the confidence of a naturalist, roots, leaves, flowers, all in the tradition of the medieval herbal. But botanists cannot identify them, not most of them. A handful have been argued to resemble a sunflower, a pepper, a water lily, arguments that quietly collapse under scrutiny. The overwhelming majority match nothing that grows anywhere on this planet. That leaves 2 possibilities, and both are strange. Either the artist was drawing real plants so badly or so stylized that they became unrecognizable, or the artist was drawing plants that do not exist. Inventing a botany, and an invented botany rendered this seriously, tells you the maker was either building a fantasy with obsessive care or building a disguise. For centuries, you could at least argue about when it was made. Then, in 2009, researchers at the University of Arizona took 4 samples of the vellum and radiocarbon, dated them. The result, the animal skin was prepared between roughly 1404 and 1438. Early 15th century. That is hard physical data, and it detonated a lot of theories. It killed the most popular suspects. The manuscript was once attributed to Roger Bacon, the 13th century friar. Impossible. He'd been dead over a century. It was blamed on the Elizabethan magicians John Dee and Edward Kelly as a forgery to sell to a gullible emperor. But they worked in the late 1500s, more than a century too late to have made this skin. But hold on, and this is the distinction the sensational headlines always skip. Radiocarbon dates the skin. It does not date the ink, it does not date the writing. Someone could, in principle, have acquired genuine 15th century vellum and written on it later. The physical object is medieval. What the object says, and when someone said it, is still open. Which brings us to the real problem. Not what does it mean, but is it the kind of thing that can mean? The entire scholarly fight collapses into 3 positions. Hold them in your head, because everything else hangs on them. 1. It is a real language, written in cipher. Someone encrypted ordinary words, Latin, a European tongue, something known, using a system we simply haven't reverse-engineered. 2. It is a real but unknown language, or a constructed one, a natural human tongue we cannot match to any surviving record, written plainly in its own alien script. 3. It is nothing. A hoax, meaningless glyphs arranged to look like language, to sell to a wealthy collector, the 15th century equivalent of a con. Every serious researcher stands somewhere on this tripod. And the reason no leg has ever won is that the text does something no one expected. When you feed the Voynich text into the tools linguists use to test whether something is a real language, it passes tests that gibberish should fail. It obeys Zipf's law, the statistical fingerprint of natural human language, where the most common word appears about twice as often as the second most common, 3 times as often as the third, and so on down the line. Random keyboard mashing does not do this, the Voynich does. There are recurring words used the way words are used. The text has a low orderly entropy. It is more repetitive, more patterned than most natural languages, but patterned in a language-like way, not a random way. And this is the detail that keeps cryptographers awake. Certain words appear only in certain sections. The vocabulary of the plant pages is not quite the vocabulary of the bathing pages. That is exactly what you'd expect from a real text about different subjects. It is not what you'd expect from someone spraying nonsense across the page. So position 3, pure random fraud, takes a serious hit. This does not read like noise. But, and the archive always has a but, being orderly is not the same as being meaningful. In 2004, a researcher named Rugg proposed something uncomfortable. You do not need a language to produce language-like statistics. You need a machine, a low-tech one. Rugg used a Cardan-grille, a stencil-like device known in the 16th century that you lay over a table of syllables and slide around to generate strings of text. With the right table of prefixes, roots, and suffixes, Rugg showed you can mass-produce gibberish that looks structured, repetitive, patterned, Voynich-flavored, with no meaning underneath at all. Critics push back hard. Rugg's method can mimic some Voynich features, but reproducing the full depth of its statistical behavior, the section-specific vocabulary, the subtle internal grammar, is another matter, and a grille device isn't clearly documented early enough for the manuscript's dating. So the hoax theory is not dead, but it is not proven either. It survives as the most disciplined version of, maybe there's nothing here, and it refuses to go away. Now, the solutions. Because every few years, someone announces they've cracked it. The record is a graveyard of these. In 2019, a researcher named Gerard Cheshire published a paper claiming the Voynich was written in proto-Romance, a lost precursor to the Romance languages, and that he had decoded its meaning in a matter of weeks. The reaction from linguists and medievalists was swift and brutal. Proto-Romance, as Cheshire described it, isn't a coherent, documented language. The method produced translations that critics called circular and arbitrary, reading meaning into the glyphs rather than out of them. The University of Bristol, which had promoted the paper, distanced itself from it within days. It is now, in the scholarly consensus, rejected, and Cheshire is not alone. The pattern repeats with almost every breakthrough: a lone researcher, a bold announcement, a media cycle, and then the same fatal flaw. Their method translates a few lines beautifully, and then cannot be applied to the next page by anyone else and produce anything coherent. That is the tell. A real decipherment is a key. It opens every door in the building. Every Voynich solution so far opens one door into one room and no further. So step back and look at the shape of the thing. This is the revelation, and it is not a comfortable one. The Voynich resists for 3 reasons at once, and each one blocks a different escape route. First, there is no external key, no bilingual inscription, no Rosetta Stone, no second document in the same script that we can read. When Egyptian hieroglyphs were cracked, it was because a stone carried the same text in Greek. The Voynich stands utterly alone. Nothing anchors it to the known world. Second, there is no identified language. Every attempt to map it onto Latin, onto a European vernacular, onto anything, dissolves. The script matches no alphabet, the words match no lexicon. And third, the paradox that is the real heart of this file. The text is too much like language to be pure accident, and too resistant to be language at all. It has the statistics of meaning and none of the substance of it, which raises the possibility that is stranger than either real or fake. What if it was engineered, deliberately built to have the appearance of meaning? A system designed by a mind that understood intuitively what language looks like from the outside and reproduced the surface without any depth beneath. Not a random hoax, a crafted one, something made to pass exactly the tests we keep running. and to fail exactly the ones that would give it away. Here is what makes that so hard to swallow. If it is a real language, we should eventually crack it. If it is random gibberish, we should be able to prove it's random. The Voynich sits in the one position that is nearly impossible to resolve, orderly enough to promise meaning, sealed enough to never deliver it, and singular enough that no outside evidence can force the question either way. That is why the codebreakers of 2 world wars, the linguists, the computer scientists, the AI models trained on every text humanity has ever written, all of them stop at the same wall. Not because they aren't clever enough, because the object may have been built to have no bottom. We know almost nothing about who made it. The provenance chain surfaces in Prague around 1600, passes through a Jesuit scholar's library, vanishes for 2.5 centuries, and reappears in 1912 in the hands of a book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich in a crate in an Italian villa. Before Prague, silence. The maker left a book of 35,000 words and not a single sentence about themselves. And maybe that is the whole point of this file. We are a species that assumes order implies meaning, that if something looks structured, someone must have been saying something. The Voynich is the exception that turns that assumption into a question. It may be the most sophisticated thing a human being ever wrote. It may be the most elaborate nothing. And the most unnerving fact in the entire record is this. After 600 years, we still cannot tell the difference. The record remains. Draw your own conclusions. This was File No. 004. The archive stays open. Next, in Decoded, we leave the single strange book behind and return to a whole civilization that wrote and traded and vanished, leaving a script that has never been read. Not the Voynich's one anonymous hand, but hundreds of clay tablets in a language that died with the palaces of Bronze Age Crete. File No. 005, Linear A. The archive is already pulling the tablets.